Hello, saving and loading are so important to any game you want to make, but in this video I'm going to create this step-by-step example with you. As you can see, we can change the health, we can move around, we can click save, then we can move around, and we can change the health again. Then when we click load, you can see that it takes us back to where we were, and we can do this over and over and over again. So in this tutorial, I wanted to go over everything there is to know about saving and loading, and how to exactly implement it into your own game. But quickly, before we get started, if you could please subscribe and drop a like on this video so YouTube can push this tutorial to more aspiring game developers, then it would mean the absolute world. But let's get started. Okay, so to get started with the game, basically what we have in the very first version is we have a little thing that has the health and has the current position. We can change these variables, right? So the health, if we click the save button and the load button, nothing works because we have no saving and loading. We just have this that updates based on where the player's at, and we have this that changes based on what buttons clicked, right? So I'll show you the code that we have set up currently, so then we can walk through and you can understand how the saving that we're going to implement is. So the player is very basic. We have a speed variable and a health variable. When we save, we're going to want to save these variables into a different script, right, which we'll create in a little bit. And the position of the player, we're also going to want to store in another script, and I'll show you how to transfer that over without having the player keep going back to that position over and over and over, right? So that's the hard part with that, but that's going to be super easy. It's only going to take like 2 lines of code if you do it right, and we'll go over that as well. So we basically have a physics process, which is gets the direction based on the input, and then we're going to create the desired velocity, speed times direction, and we're going to just move the player, right? So that's basic movement that you're going to have for any game. And then we have these buttons, the buttons in the world, and these buttons send a signal from this control node, and this signal goes into the player, and this is right here. So basically this control node has a script, and if the plus button's clicked, then it's going to make the action variable a plus sign, and it's going to emit the signal, and it's going to emit that action. And if we click the minus, well, that same thing's going to happen. So then that's going to go into the player script. It's going to call this function, and we are going to have the action. So if the action is equal to a plus, then we're going to call the gain health function here, and we'll just change the health variable, and the action minus is going to take damage. So then we'll call the -5 function, right? And right here we emit a signal update UI, which is we're just going to output the health variable, and we're going to output the self.position, so the position of our player. And if we go into our player script, you can see that on this text, we're going to basically take the health and the player position that we just received from the player script, and we're going to just update our text live. So it's a very simple game that we have going on, and I'll have a link to this version and the finished version in the description on my itch.io page. So you can go and download that, so you can either download the first version and the after version, and you can download this version right here, the first version, and you can follow along with this tutorial so you can understand exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it, how everything works, and I'm going to explain everything as good as I can in this video. But now let's actually get started with adding the save and load system to the game. Okay, so first we're going to create a new script, which is where we're going to store all of our variables. So we can click File, New Script, and we can just create this to be the player data.gd, right? And we want this to extend a resource, because the way that we're going to be saving our stuff is going to be saving it inside of a resource, right? So we can say extends resource, and we're going to set a class name so we're able to access this script from our player and from other scripts and other nodes throughout the game, so we can update stats, because this is basically going to be where we store all of the player stats. So for example, this one in this example is not going to change, but we can have an export var speed. I want to just show you that anything that you want your player to have that could be changed, that you want to be changed based on different things, like if you have a potion, enchant, whatever it may be, right? Or the health, right? So a good example in this video is going to be the health, because that's going to be a changing variable. So obviously speed's not going to be changed, but we're going to keep it in this script, and it's going to be saved as 500 every single time unless we make a change to it, which we could do. But we can say var health, right? And I'll explain all this here better in just a minute. But if we have health equals to 100, and then let's say we want to also save the player's position, right? So we can say export var, and we can say var save position. So basically this is going to save wherever the last position the player was when we click save. So wherever we are on the map, when we click save, that's the position it's going to store here. And right now we don't know, right? So it's going to be a vector 2. We're going to make sure that is a vector 2. And then we're going to want to call all of our functions in here. So let's say we want to make a change to the health. Well, we're going to work on that in this script. It's going to be called from a different script. So the player script right here in this take damage, we're going to call a a line of code, which we'll go over here in a little bit once we create some variables so we can access it. But because we can't access it from this script now, but when we can access it, we'll call this function that we're about to create from that script. So we can say function change health, and this is going to make so much more sense when we walk through it at the end after we have everything else complete. And whatever value we input into the function is going to go in, and we're going to use that value to say health plus equals whatever the value is, so we can change this health variable, right? And then we're going to create another function to just update our save position. So we can say update position, and update position can be, we can just say the variable that we want to enter is a value, but we want this value to be a vector too, right? Because we're going to be saving the player's position. And we can just say save position is equal to whatever the value is, right? So this is constantly updating. This will be constantly updating. But when we click load, we're going to update it to whatever we saved it as, right? And this update position here is only going to be called, or I mean, we're only going to load the save position. We're only going to set the player's dot position to equal save position whenever we load the game. So the moment we load the game, it will be equal to whatever we save the position as, right? And this is going to make more sense when we go through it again, like I said. But so now we go back into our player script, and we're going to have some variables for where we store the data. So where are we going to want to store these variables here when the game is closed, or when we have, we're playing it, but we want to keep that data somewhere, right? Well, we're going to want to create a path, and we'll do this in the player.gd, since this is going to be the player's save file, right? So when saving a game, you're going to want to have different variables or different file paths for each save that you want to have. So let's say you have a player save, an enemy save, this save, you'll have different saves. So the very first var, which is going to be the same for every save, is going to be save file path, and that's going to be equal to the user. Make sure it's user, and whatever you want to call it, we'll just call it the save folder, right? Just like that. And that's going to be our path. That's going to be the same that you're going to use for every other thing that you have. So let's say you want to save for your enemy, that's going to be the file path, but you're going to want to have a separate thing that's going to be save file name, and this is going to be for that exact thing. So right here we're going to be saving the player stats, so we'll say player save dot tres, right? So that's going to be stored inside of here, and we'll add these together in a little bit based on, so it's modular and you can use this code wherever. And then we want to access the resource that we just created, so we'll say var player data, and we want player data to be equal to player data, which is the resource, and a new one. So we'll do this, and then we can remove these variables here, and we can now access, since we have this here, we can now access the variables we just created in the other script. So you can see that we have speed here. Well, in our player data, we have speed as well. It's called speed, but how would we access that? Well, we can just say here player data dot speed, and now we can save it just like that, right? But we have health here, which is going to be the exact same, data dot health now. And then down here, how are we going to call that health function? Well, whenever we take damage, we're going to want to update our health function inside of our, well, let me show you how this works. So now it's not going to update, right? Because this is pulling the player data health variable, right? So, and the only reason this is giving us an error is because we do not have a variable health anymore, but we can say variable health equals to 100, right? So this here is pulling the variable from player data, which we never change, right? We never change that variable, so it's always going to be equal to 100. And it used to work, but now it's not going to work, because here it was pulling this variable, but now this variable is no longer updating. So we need to call our player data, we need to call our player data function that we created over here, our change health function, and then we can insert a value, whatever value we want it to be, and then we can update our health, and then we'll pull our health from there so we can update it so we can show what our health actually is, right? So this is how you access stats. This is how you're going to access every single stat in the game. So if you want to get the player's speed and you want to use that, then you're going to say player data.speed, and that's what you're going to do for every single thing. Every single stat you save, you have to do player data.speed. And we'll go over this later whenever we say player data.position, when we get the save position when we load it, right? But so right here, obviously, if we're going to play the game, we can't play it in this scene. We have to be in the world, so we can actually make a change to our health. But you can see that if we make a change to the health, it doesn't update, because we're pulling, this is the official file that if we click save, is going to save this number. And the only reason that is because we're pulling it from here, right? Like I said, I'm sorry, I just repeated myself 100 times, I feel like. But Let me show you how we do it. So we'd say player data dot whatever we want to call, which is going to be our change health function, and we can update a value. So we can say we want the value to be take damage is going to be -5, right? And if we gain health, well, it's going to be the exact same. Player data dot change health +5, just like that, right? And that's going to be how easy it is to change those functions. So now if we play, you're going to see that it's now going to update, but it's pulling it from our save file now. So we're going to be able to save that resource file, and it's going to work how it should. So that's good. It updates now. It works. Okay, so now that we have that, we can have, or we haven't actually stored it. We've just accessed our resource folder, and we've created the name and the path of where we want to save it, but we haven't actually saved it yet. So how are we going to create the save and load? Well, let's create a ready function first. And in this ready function, we're going to have a function. We're going to call another function, which we haven't created yet, which is basically where we're going to access the save path, where we're going to store it. Where is it actually going to happen? So we can say verify save directory, and we can say save file path, which is going to be the path that we want to save it at, right? Like up here, we want to save it here. So then we can say this, and then we're going to create a new function because we're going to get an error. But we can say save directory, and I promise if this is not making any sense at all right now and you don't understand exactly what I'm doing, well, it's going to make a lot more sense here once I explain it, once we have it fully complete. But we can say direct access dot make direct absolute, which is a Godot function, and path, right? So now we know where we're going to want to actually store it. How are we going to load and store the data? Well, to do this, I want to create two different functions. So we're going to have a load data function, right? So when we want to load the data, we're going to call this function, and we're going to say player data, which is, look, so this is going to make a lot more sense. So this is the resource that we're pulling everything from, right? So we're pulling the health variable from, we're pulling the speed variable. So basically anything with player data dot that variable is going to update when we call this right here. It's going to update to what is in that script. So we can say, or what was saved in that script, right? So we can say resource loader, which is a very, very powerful Godot thing, is the resource loading and saving, which is what we're going over, right? So we can say path plus save file name, which is going to give us the exact area of where the information is located. Then we can say duplicate is equal to true, and we can just say print loaded, so we know that it has loaded. And this is going to make another function, which is going to be save, and when we save, it's going to be kind of the same. We just want resource saver this time dot save, and we want to say player data save file path plus save file name, just like that, and then we can print save. So if you look at these, this is going to be pretty self-explanatory, right? So we have resource saver, so we access the resource saver dot save. What are we going to save? Well, we're going to save this resource, right? So we're going to save the player data resource, which remember is all of these, right? So it's kind of lining up now. And where are we going to save it? Well, we're going to save it right here. Then when we want to load it, we're going to say player data, which is right here, right? Dot resource loader, or equals resource loader dot load whatever we have stored here, right? We just stored it here, so it's going to load what we just stored, and that's what's going to happen, right? So if we are to play it, we won't be able to really do anything because we don't have buttons to call these functions, and we're never calling these functions. So if we go here and we create a new function, which is going to be a process delta function, we can just say if input dot is action just pressed, whatever our buttons are. We'll go and create the save button here in just a second. We'll call the save function. If we say if input dot is action just pressed, the load data, or the load button, I guess we'll just call it the load button, then we can call the load data function, right? And then that's when we're going to want to emit this signal instead of emitting it up here. So we'll just update our UI because we want to update it every single frame. Obviously it's going to do the same up here. I just want to make sure that this is all for physics stuff and this is all for processing stuff. So that's the only reason I'm moving it down here, just for that reason, because that really isn't anything to do with physics. This is all physics. This isn't physics. So I'm going to move it into the process function, right? Just to make everything a little bit more neat. And then that is going to be it for the health and the it's going to update the position still, but that's going to be how we save the health. Now if we go in and we play, the health is going to work. The health should theoretically work after we create these 2 action keys, right? So we'll go create that in the input map here in just a second, but that is going to work, except the position isn't going to work because we haven't saved the position. We've never saved the position yet, and we never load the position back onto the player when we load the game, which we'll go and we'll do in a second by creating our own custom ready function whenever we load it. So it's going to basically be the function that's called only when we load the game. So it's like it gets everything ready the moment we load the game. So it's like basically it's basically a ready function. You know how a ready function is called when we start the game or when we first enter that scene. Well, this is going to be called when we load the game. So it's going to be like our own ready function. But if we go up here, project settings, input map, then we can say new input action, which is going to be load, and I'm going to make load L. And then we can say new action, which is going to be save. And I'm going to make save K just because it's right next to it, just like that. Then we can close. We can play the world. We can move around. We can change up the health a little bit. If we clicked K, you can see in the output it prints save. We can move around. We can click, we can change the health back to 100, and then we can click load. You can see the health works. Or we can go down, we can click load, it goes back. We can go down, we can click save, we can go back, up, we can load. The health is working, but now how would we do the position, right? So the position is going to be a little bit more complex, but it's also going to be very, very easy. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to, like I said, create that ready function, which we're going to do right here in the load data function. We're just going to say function, or under the load data, because it's going to be our own, we're going to say on start of load. So the moment we load in the game, we're going to call this function. We're just going to say the self dot position of player. So the player's position is going to equal the player data dot save position, whatever the save position is equal to. But how are we going to call the save position? How are we going to save the position that we want, right, when we want it? So basically, we're going to save this every single frame. We're going to change the position every single frame, but we're only going to tell the player to equal that position when we load it. So if we go up here to the process, we can just do it just like we did with the updating the health. We can say player data dot update position self dot position, whatever the position is currently equal to, just like that. Now everything should work. So if we play, you can see we can move around, we can change up the health, I guess. We can click save. We can come down here, we can change up the health, and we can click load, and well, it's gonna load. The health works, right? Load, 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 but the position isn't working. So how or we have something going on that we messed up on that isn't updating how it should be. So now we can go through and we're going to have to figure out exactly what's going on. Okay, so it was a very easy fix. We just never ended up calling this function. So we never update it. So whenever we load the data, we want to call the start function, right? We want to, whatever we want to the player to do the moment we load the game, we want to actually call that function so it loads it. So when we go around, we can move. We can change up the health. Health is 120 now, and we were located. We can just save it here. Then we can go up here. We can minus health. We click load, and it's going to take us back. It's going to take our health back, right? So if we make the health different, and we move around, and we click load, it's going to go back 120 health in the exact same position. And that is how you create loading in Godot. And that is how loading and saving works with the resource, and that is how simple it is. As you can see, the only thing we really changed is we created a resource script here, which is going to have different export variables. And let me explain how this works, right? So we have the resource, which has our variables for our player, which is going to be our player data, and we have two functions that update these variables inside of it. In the player script, the only thing we do is, instead of having our own variables up here at the top, we have variables that are accessed that are pulled from that script. So we only get variables from that script, like the speed, the health, the position when we update it, right? So everything's pulled from that script. So we save that script, we load just that script. So when we play it, we're going to load in that script, and then we're going to automatically pull all the variables just like this throughout the code. So it's very, very modular, and it works very smoothly. So that's kind of how the saving is going to work. And as you can see, it was pretty simple. We only added what, maybe 50 lines of code total throughout the entire game, maybe 50. And we have load data, process function, start load, save, and that is all we have, except we have to change this up, right? We have a couple variables, we have these two, and down here we changed up this so we can call the change health function inside of our player data script. But that's all we had to change in this entire game. So if you want to check out this, it's going to be linked in the below for free download on itch, and this will be very, very beneficial to you. I think it's going to be a very helpful project to go look through yourself and to see exactly how everything works. And if you're having any issues, then please let me know in the comments down below. But thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye bye.